Today's show is dedicated to a little thing I like to call your mobile phone charger. Maybe you've heard of it. It's that thing that came with your phone that was, all coiled up and looked nice in the beginning, but now barely charges. You have to blow the hole of your phone a lot to get it to connect and charge, and it's just the worst. It doesn't reach, so you can't do anything while you're trying to charge, and it'll probably be obsolete technology by the time I'm done with this sentence. But guys, look on the bright side. At least they're also expensive as heck. I'm sorry for the profanity. And if you want to get a knockoff, you can buy 16 of them on Amazon probably, and they'll break on the way over here. And the ones that do survive, they'll just bring you heartache and pain. But I'm rambling. On with the show. Welcome back, dear friends. And if this is your first time listening to Several Stories High, welcome back, dear friends. Thank you for joining me for another story. Another story. I couldn't be happier that the weather is not just awful. I know that's a very groundbreaking thing to talk about, the weather, but it's pretty nice. It's fall, or autumn as the French call it. As you are probably aware, I do hope that we are still in our October phase of Several Stories High, where most of the stories, I hope all the stories, are themed on something with either fall or autumn or October or Halloween, baby. And this is just one of those stories. If you haven't read the title and you just blindly trust the podcast episodes, which I would, advise against, you'll know this one is called Another Day in Dragon Country. And the only thing I really have to say before we get going is this. A while back, I was playing some music at a wedding with two dear friends of mine. And how those deer became friends of mine and learn how to talk and stand up right on their hooves is beyond me. Oh, but seriously though, they're just two guys. But as I said, we were playing a wedding, and it was really fun. I was playing drums, and my one friend, the human guy, he was singing, and the other human guy, he was playing the guitar. So that was our setup. But unbeknownst to two of us, the one other guy invited another guy, so this is the fourth guy. This is an amazing story, by the way, right? Invited him to come and play with us, and he played the violin, or fiddle, as the French call it. So, long story short, he comes and we start practicing for this wedding. And his name is a cool one. You've probably heard it before. Slade. His name is Slade, Slade. And if you know me at all, you know that I couldn't pass up a golden opportunity like this one when we were introduced to Slade. He shook my hand, and I immediately said, exactly like this, and with this exact voice inflection, "Slade, huh? Let me ask you something, Slade. Have you ever slayed a dragon?" Slade never talked to me again. And I guess the only thing left to say is, you are listening to Several Stories High. I'm Nathaniel David Knox, and I have a story to tell you. It's called Another Day in Dragon Country. Shall we begin? Welcome to Several Stories High, a narrative podcast featuring original stories from all corners of the spectrum. Fiction, fact, or perhaps more appropriately, somewhere in the great galaxies between. I'm Nathaniel David Knox, Let's see how high we can climb. The fire she built reminded Abigail of her deep love for autumn. All of its smells in particular. And at the top of this scented list, or list of scents, if ever such a thing existed, was the aroma of the little contained crackling inferno that her hands presently hovered above. The sweet, gentle smoke made her nostrils flare for more. Then her eyes squinted, basking and remembering in that crisp fall air. It was as if being introduced to a former, fonder version of herself, someone who'd been locked away as long as time itself, during the hotter days of lesser seasons. And the only thing she loved greater than the fragrance of her current forest respite came in the form of her little brother Thomas's distant call. "Abby! Abby, come quick! You're gonna want to see this!" he shouted through the trees. "Oh yeah?" she replied playfully, still kneeling by the fire. She could hear her brother's jittery footsteps crunch away through the distant blankets of fallen leaves, and so she stood to her own 2 feet and rubbed her chilled hands together, then bundled up and made a mad dash in Thomas's direction. Through the trees she zoomed, puffing out little plumes of sharp breath. Her left boot surmounted an old stump, giving her enough of a boost to scale the winding creek. Soon she knelt and peeled back a particularly thick curtain of brush, and she entered a small clearing that was surrounded by a seemingly endless congregation of barren trees. There Thomas stood, his hands on his hips triumphantly, his little chest puffed out and a smile on his face. Abigail grinned, her head turned slightly. Her little brother had hoped she would have seen it by now. She had, but it was an older sister's duty to make the younger of the siblings work for it a little bit, no? "So," Thomas said, still grinning proudly. "What do you think?" "About..." "Oh, come on," he moaned, flailing his arms. "The giant pile of leaves over here?" Abigail looked everywhere but the spot in question, and kept a playful look of bewilderment on her face just long enough to match the howling autumn wind. Then she winked and said, "Hey, and what a pretty pile it is." And it was. A big, bulging hill of fallen leaves, nearly as tall as a horse, with crunchy shades of amber and gold and tangerine and plum. "Found it back here when I was chasing that jackrabbit," Thomas said, eyeing the enormous sea of leaves. They were practically screaming to be leapt into. "I assume the creature got away?" said Abigail. Thomas curled his lips downward to affirm his little blunder embarrassingly. "No matter, Tom. We've got some pheasant back at the house I can rustle up." There was a silence in those woods, a divine, albeit pregnant silence. "Well," Abigail said from the corner of her eye. The thought of her little brother's giddiness gave her butterflies of joy and fondness. At least something still could in this land. "Go on, Sir Thomas. A mound of leaves like this one only come every few centuries." Surprised and energized, Thomas nodded and ran over to the thick, sturdy tree next to the big pile of leaves. He climbed it like lightning, and then carefully made his way along the longest outstretched branch that served as a perfect leaping-off point. A final look to Abby, one last smile, a deep breath, and Thomas leapt, soaring face first towards the crunchy autumn leaf mountain cloud. Except... rather than sink into the leafy puff, Thomas flopped square on top of the heap, and the only thing that seemed to crunch were his ribs. A puzzled and shocked Abigail gasped and scaled up the pile towards Thomas. It seemed he'd be fine, though the wind had been knocked out of him to join its kinfolk howling about. But what kind of leaf pile was this? Such a hardened heap, greedy and unwelcoming. Abigail, helping her brother up atop the mountain of leaves, began to kick away at the mound beneath them. But if not more leaves beneath, then what? Is this a big rock? Are we on a rock? Stupid, Thomas said, still moaning in slight pain as he too scraped away leaves. Stupid rock. So much for the greatest leaf pile in all the land. I would have kept chasing that jackrabbit if I knew it was just some dumb rock beneath all this. But rocks don't breathe, do they? Thomas looked closer at the gray coarse foundation of the mound they stood upon. Gray was the foundation, all right, but it wasn't the gray texture of stone they were palming, but the gray, rumbling touch of a dragon! The mound moaned with thunder, and soon Abigail and Thomas were thwarted off of it, tumbling to the cold ground. Before they could arise, the former pile of leaves awoke, a long, scaly, gray neck unfurling, and the fiery face at the end of that neck let out a shriek that made the siblings cover their ears. The behemoth stood on its four trunk-like legs and whipped its head towards the two, like a swift serpent of stone. It breathed out a cloud of fire that nearly scorched them had they both not leapt away. Thomas was breathing even harder than the dragon now, his eyes wide with fear as he and Abigail hid behind a tree. What are we gonna do? Thomas, Abigail said, grabbing her brother's face with both of her calloused hands for a swift moment of sisterly certainty. This isn't the first time, remember? You know what to do. Go get the knights. But what about you? Go! They waited for another burst of flames to parry, and as soon as the second barrage ended, Thomas fled back into the woods. Love you, little brother, Abigail quickly murmured to herself. A gritty gray tail the size of a downed oak lashed out at her. She leapt over it, but one of the nail-sized spikes grazed her boot just enough to send her to her back. The one day I forget to bring the crossbow, she thought angrily, heart thumping like a war drum. The dragon shrieked again and chomped its massive jaws at her. She rolled away and stood. Then she remembered a particular patch of woods between them and the house that might still have a trap or two still set. She screamed at the monster, eyes wide with rage, hoping her ferocity would insult the leviathan of the land enough to follow her. It seemed the beast was adequately offended. She sprinted for the woods. The monster thundered right behind her, scorching trees and bushes in its path, leaving an ashen trail in its wake. Somewhere, Abigail thought. Somewhere around here. Aha! She yelled. She found the old rope and lever harnessed into the barren tree she'd been looking for, the one with her and Thomas's initials carved in it. As the dragon careened towards her, she looked up to make sure the two trap logs were still set above, ready to release. But there was no time to be sure. Come on, she whispered to herself during the nearing thunder, eyeing the terrifying beast approaching. A little closer, a little closer. She slammed down the lever. The trap released with a ripping sound. The dragon was nearly upon her. She clenched her fist. If today was her day, then so be it. Two massive logs swung down from either side, destined to meet in the path of the monster. In a flash of near perfection, the logs met with the loud and violent thunk of a crash. But the blow wasn't fatal. The dragon only reared back to mourn its tail, smashed to scaly bits. With another burst of flames, the dragon regained its composure. But it was Abigail who made the advance this time. With a thick chunk of rope she'd ripped from the trap, she ran towards the monster. She dodged most of the fire, though her wrist wasn't completely spared. She leapt onto the back of the dragon, the leaf pile imposter, ruiner of autumn days. Atop the beast, she wrapped the rope around its neck and pulled. She flexed with all her might. The dragon reared back in anguish, and Abigail nearly fell from it. Choked bursts of fire spat all around. She knew that either she or the beast would be snuffed out at any second, but which one? The leashed dragon shrieked so loud that Abigail had to cover her ears. And from the monster, she fell. Then the gray devil saw her and reared back its neck into an S-like shape, poised to strike. Its jaws snapped down. Abigail barreled away. Again it struck, and again she rolled. A third strike. She jabbed a jagged stick into the thing's eye. She reached for another stick, ready to totally blind the fiend when the dragon fell silent. There was a sharp thumping sound, and another. Then 3 horses approached, carrying 3 hooded figures, all toting unloaded crossbows. Thomas was riding with the last of the 3, his eyes searching for his sister with a desperate thirst. And the dragon, 3 arrows protruding from its neck, fell to its front knees, wobbling like a drunkard. The hooded figures aimed their newly reloaded crossbows for a final strike when... "No!" Abigail said, breathing deep and heavy. "Give it here." One of the hooded figures handed over a crossbow, with a special tipped arrow, loaded and hungry. The dying dragon was eye to eye with her, literally. She looked into the devil's remaining eye, smoke pouring from its jaws like misty blood. There were no clever last words topped with little catchphrase bows on top. She jammed the tip of the crossbow beneath the dragon's chin and fired. The fire-breathing ghoul's remaining eye went dark, and it flopped down to the leaves with a limp and crunchy thud. The hooded figures cheered. They clapped and yelled and laughed. Abigail took a bow with a half smirk. And 3 members of the Knight family, Deirdre, Annie, and their younger cousin Cherish, all pulled down their hoods once the chilly wind ceased. "What's this, your second?" Deirdre said, helping Abigail up to the same horse as she. "Was," Abigail said, hanging on behind Deirdre. She spit bits of leaves as they all galloped away. If only they tasted as pretty as they looked. "Thanks," Abigail said, a faint butterfly in her stomach as their shared horse leapt high above the creek. Don't mention it," said Deirdre. "It's what neighbors do. My God, after the one we all took down last Christmas? Let's call it even. At least come back to the house for some pheasant," Abigail said. "You cooking it, or Sir Thomas over there?" "Me," Abigail said with a laugh, winking at her brother, who seemed to have heard them talking from his own galloping vantage point. "All right, on one condition," Deirdre said as the trio of trotting horses broke through the woods. The old wooden farmhouse was now in clear view. "Yeah? And what's that?" said Abigail. "You gotta buy me a new hoodie. Thistles tore this one up something fierce on the way to save your butts." "Deal," Abigail said. Smirking, Deirdre shouted, "Just another day in Dragon Country," to which everybody echoed in a jovial routine. "Another day in Dragon Country." I suppose there are a couple of details I should have pointed out to you first. You see, Abigail and Thomas's little farmhouse sat on the southern tip of Fairfield, a rural town roughly 25 miles south of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Yes, another day in Dragon Country indeed. In the year of this particular day of dragon conquest, 2009. The triumphant war party all filed into the little farmhouse, and the next 3 hours of autumn would be full of much eating and drinking and laughter. This episode of Several Stories High was written, composed, and produced by me, Nathaniel David Knox. Thank you so much for listening. I really mean this. This is the point at the end of the episode where I usually make the spiel about how we have a website, which is severalstorieshigh.com, and then we have all the social media handles, which is @SSHpod, or Spod if you prefer. Just remember there's 2 S's. And I also usually say something about the importance of leaving a review and a rating on iTunes or whatever other sites have reviews. And I'm not saying that's not important, but even more importantly, I just want to focus on the fact that I really appreciate each and every one of you taking the time out of your day to listen and imagine with me. So if you leave a review, great. If you leave a rating, great. But I don't want to say that anymore just to say it, or that's the thing to say, or to get higher up in charts or whatever. Of course I want the show to succeed, but even more so I want whether it's 10 people or 10,000 people there listening, I want you guys to enjoy the experience and have an organic meal. No, not an organic meal. Having an organic love for the show to grow, and then tell others about it and tell your friends and share it on social media, but all coming from that same magical place that you and I are sharing right now by communicating via this awesome new medium known as podcasting. So all that to say, thank you so much for listening, and I greatly look forward to making the next episode. Since I've started doing this show, I've always kind of planned on 12 episodes for season 1, as I'm calling it. Very interesting title. So we've got this is episode 9, so we got, let me do the math here, hold on. 12 minus 9, okay, 3 more episodes for this season. I'll probably try to squeeze in one more 2 for 7 special, maybe a spooky one for Halloween, but I'm excited as we kind of come to a somewhat of a close in the next few episodes. So hit me up on social media or the email, as they call it, and let me know how the show's doing, what you guys are thinking about it, and if there's anything you'd like to see more or less of, as long as it's somewhat nice. Anyway, gang, all this to say is thank you.